3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of discovering human origins. So when it comes to the history of our species, for the vast majority of our existence, we have known next to nothing about human origins. Instead, as I've talked about in previous episodes, people would create myths to try to make sense of an existence they didn't understand. However, in the 1800s, after hundreds of thousands of years of human existence, our species finally made a huge breakthrough. And this came when the English scientist Charles Darwin discovered evolution, the idea that all animals share a common ancestor and evolved from earlier, now extinct animals, which he wrote about in his book The Origins of Species in 1859. And later, he and another English scientist, Thomas Huxley, would expand on this idea. For example, in 1863, Thomas Huxley would write the book Evidence as to Man's Place in Nature, which argued that our species Homo sapiens and modern apes share a common ancestor. And then in 1871, Charles Darwin would focus specifically on human evolution in his book The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. From here, scientific research would do the rest, because through the 1800s and 1900s, various hominin fossils would be discovered, helping create an understanding of what human evolution looked like. Because now people were able to identify fossils of similar species to our own that not only lived before us, but also some that also lived alongside us before later going extinct. Additionally, with the emergence of DNA capabilities, especially in the 21st century, and the ability to analyze not only the DNA of people alive today and modern apes, but also earlier hominin species, we are now able to prove the concept of human evolution in even more ways than before, because we can see that we share DNA with all animals that have ever existed, and that we also share more DNA with some animals more than others, showing that we're closer in ancestry with some animals more than others. Because like a book, our DNA tells the story of our ancestry, and when you share the same genetic mutations as someone else, it is proof that you are related. Now today, there are still evolution skeptics around the world who, mostly due to religious beliefs or conspiracy theories and just a general misunderstanding of evolution, still tend to reject evolution, despite the vast consensus of evidence which proves the concept of evolution given the fossil record and DNA testing, as I mentioned before. And much of this comes from the concern that evolution hurts their faith, despite evolution, of course, not being mentioned in any religious texts, obviously, since they were written thousands of years prior to the concept even being developed. In reality, though, if a person wants to maintain their religious beliefs, there's nothing about evolution that serves to contradict their faith unless they want it to. After all, not only is it not mentioned in these religious texts, but it's also true that so much of these religious texts are so broad and convoluted that any issues that arise with the concept of evolution merely stem from one's biased interpretation of religious texts. I mean, we see it all the time, how 10 different people can read the Bible and walk away with 10 different interpretations of it. And that's simply because it is a book that was written thousands of years ago in a totally different historical context from today. And it represents a compilation of specifically selected religious texts that were sloppily thrown together by church leaders under pressure from the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, who worked very hard to create the Christianity as we know it today for political reasons. I mean, think about that for a second. You had a Roman emperor who was not even a Christian himself elevate this religion to the mainstream when it was not very popular, and then helped cultivate the faith in what it would become today. When prior to Constantine the Great, the religion was not very centralized, and you just had lots of people writing texts about the faith, some of which would survive and others which would not. And so this is why it is so difficult to get a consistently coherent viewpoint from the Bible because there are numerous contradictions in it, given that so many texts were written by different people. And that's why it should not be surprising that evolution is not mentioned in the Bible, because why would it be? However, if one believes that the Bible is the Word of God or inspired by God, then in Genesis, when it is said that God created man from dust, if this is an all-powerful and all-knowing God, which many Christians and people of other religions believe, then how could one possibly claim that this isn't a reference to evolution? I mean, wouldn't the best way to understand God's creation be to observe it and utilize these scientific observations like evolution to then interpret the true intent behind God's words in religious texts like the Bible? Because if it is, then of course evolution could be compatible with the Bible. And to reject these scientific discoveries in many ways makes it hard for someone to claim to be a dedicated follower of God. Because if you truly believe in God, then why on earth would you reject what God has allowed science to discover regarding God's creation? And the reason for all this is that many people are not really interested in some deep critical analysis of their respective religions. Instead, many choose to blindly believe what the leader of their family or local religious group says regarding what to believe. And in many ways, people also just want to believe what brings them comfort. So for instance, if they've been told by people who have no understanding of evolution or the history of their own religions that, evolution is bad and is a rejection of their faith, then they will reject evolution. However, we know that many people who are religious, whether they're Christian or Muslim or Jewish, also believe in evolution. So this is really something that is more of a political issue rather than necessarily a religious one. Some people just don't like the idea of evolution. But many religions, have no issue with accepting evolution. And in fact, many people who are religious will look at evolution as something that's actually empowering. Like, wow, look at this amazing, complex process that only someone like God could create. So the point of all this is that just because someone is religious does not mean they have to reject science. Because again, if God created the world we live in, then God created the ability for us to conduct science and provide us the ability to make scientific discoveries regarding God's creation. And to reject all that sure seems like a rejection of God's will. So unfortunately, the debate between religious groups and how to make sense of evolution is an ongoing issue since Darwin discovered the concept. But regardless, it is still by far what is most likely to be true when it comes to the origin of our species. So with all that, we are a species that has finally been able to discover the origins of itself. As always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.